that which they have done, that perhaps they may return. And that is verse 30, ayat 41. And without going further, Sayyidi Fazlan, I'll just hand it back to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay, what I would like to do also is to sort of spend a couple of minutes looking at encapsulate what I was trying to say last time in putting together chapters 1 and 2. It's a kind of a revision, so as a means of introducing or dovetailing into the next section of the book, thought I'd lay the ground here and take another quick look at chapters 1 and 2. I attempt to show in the House of Cards that the current globalized world we live in was built on the graveyards of major civilizations and countless other cultures. The historian Carol Quigley, the American historian Carol Quigley, observes that 6 civilizations that were destroyed since the European sea voyages began were the Andean, Mayan, Hindu, Chinese, Japanese, and Islamic. And I quote here, "When we consider the untold numbers of other societies simpler than civilizations, which Western civilization has destroyed or is now destroying, societies such as the Hottentots, the Iroquois, the Tasmanians, the Navajos, the Caribs, and countless others, the full frightening power of Western civilization becomes obvious." End of quote. According to Quigley's estimates, it took 6.5 millennia from 6000 BC for 14 or so succeeding civilizations to destroy each other up to the European period. The Europeans managed to destroy 6 thriving civilizations since the start of their voyages at the end of the 15th century in a matter of just 500 years. An example of 19th century imperial attitudes behind this destruction can be gleaned from the works of the Earl of Cromer, who wrote in a personal history of modern Egypt, and I quote, "It is absurd to suppose that Europe will look on as a passive spectator whilst a retrograde government based on purely Mohammedan principles and obsolete Oriental ideas is established in Egypt." And as we know now, they didn't look on, did they? And just think of the Suez Canal and the Suez Crisis and what Jamal Nasser did when he scuppered a passenger steamer in the middle of the Suez Canal. So what then? What then did replace the old civilizations? What was it that the Europeans were up to? Missionary activity was strong, especially by the Catholic Church, followed belatedly by the Protestants. Because when Vasco da Gama and Columbus sailed out in the late 15th century, it was by the middle, it took another 50 years before the Dutch and the English came out with their ocean travel. But what they had in common was the twin aspirations of power and profit, which pushed them into extremes of brutality and chicanery. Bear in mind that the Iberian voyages that opened up the world preceded the Enlightenment. That is, the Newtonian, the Enlightenment, the Newtonian scientific revolution, Adam Smith, the Wealth of Nations, followed by the Industrial Revolution. As these influences fundamentally changed Europe, the Europeans changed the rest of the world with them. I concluded the first chapter with a verse taken from the Quran that encapsulates this whole matter, and that's in Surah Nur, at 40. Surah Nur is the 24th surah in the Quran, and I'm quoting from at 40. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أو كظلمات في بحر لجي يغشاه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكر يراها. And I translation, or they are as shadows upon a sea obscure, covered by a billow, above which is a billow, above which are clouds, shadows piled one upon another. When he puts forth his hands, well nigh he cannot see it. What I call the house of cards is built layer upon layer with what modernity represents. The first layer consists of the banks, which excretes phantom money, that is the cement that holds this fragile edifice together. On top of which is built the nation state, industry, trade, business, large and small, education, health, housing and social services, communication, and the multifarious institutions that keep our lives moving, all depending on the individual as a consumer and a source of tax at the top of this rickety edifice. My main theme in the second chapter of the book, A Ravished Earth, is that we, the human race, are disconnected from the natural world. The human assault on the planet has been mindless, brutal, and total. The relentless battering we have inflicted upon the environment in modern times in search of the good life has been deliberate and premeditated, illustrating the degradation of our relationship with the natural world. We have ravaged the earth from the depths of the ocean all the way to the highest point in the stratosphere, and the scale, frequency, and longevity of the types of events we have been discussing have their origins in recent history. Pre-industrial societies were biodegradable, and as they died off, the forests regenerated, and the sands covered their traces. We are abusing abundance, and it would seem that nothing we do is exempt in our pursuit of a consumer lifestyle that appears to take precedence over everything else. We are in a progress trap, and that is what I'm coming to now. So we move on to chapter 3, which I call prosperity in perspective. Yes, I'm questioning prosperity. I take the view that the idea of prosperity is utterly and totally out of date. It has had its time, and we are now in a situation where our unmitigated assault on planetary resources has been of such a scale that it would be dangerous, if not suicidal, to hold on to this idea. And there are approaching 8 billion of us, still growing and wanting more and more from a rapidly shrinking resource base. It has been estimated that today we use the equivalent of 1 3/4 Earths to provide the resources we use and absorb our waste in 1 year. And that is, it now takes the Earth 18 months to regenerate what we use in 12. This does not take into account our excessive consumption of non-renewable resources, which by its very definition cannot ever be recovered. So what is prosperity? Are we prosperous? Yeah, it's an open-ended question. For some, prosperity is today it's 2 cars in the drive, or a Mercedes and a BMW maybe, and in front of a large open, spacious house. For people in the past, it may have been silks and satins and carriage driven by 6 horses, maybe. But there are maybe different degrees of it. But this was only a minority activity, and people who had consumed more and more, which left the people who aspire to this prosperous lifestyle still wanting more and more. But this is what this society is all about. Prosperity in today's world is measured by GDP. That is the amount of wealth and services that a country produces each year. The advanced Western countries and the likes of Japan and Singapore usually occupy the top of the GDP league tables, and at the bottom, and the bottom is taken up by sub-Saharan countries and others such as Bangladesh and Afghanistan. But there is a price to pay for being prosperous, and that is debt. Norway, which was rated the happiest country in the world in terms of its prosperity by the United Nations in 2017, and Denmark, rated the second, at a household to GDP debt ratio of 98.9 and 123.6% respectively. It would seem that in today's world, prosperity is anxiety measured by the amount of debt one accumulates to lead consumer lifestyles. This is the norm, isn't it? I mean, in order to be a consumer, you really have to be in debt, and most people are. And to be happy, you need to possess things. This is the human condition. If you don't possess things, then you become downright unruly. And what we didn't know existed today appears tomorrow, and we are made to want it. And G5 is the answer, isn't it? We're all going to have G5 phones very soon in the G5 network.
5G.
5G. Thank you, Adnan. 5G. How we get it mixed up? So I devote the third chapter on prosperity to economic fundamentals such as progress, which I consider to be a trap, development, which I describe as delusional, growth, which I described as a fantasy. In order to understand these processes, I look at three different civilizations during different phases of human history to discover how they emerged, prospered, and collapsed. They were the Mesopotamian civilization that emerged in the 6th millennium before the Common Era, the Mayan civilization of Central America, which evolved after the 5th millennium, and the Easter Island civilization that thrived about the 5th century and whose mysterious megaliths were discovered by Dutch sailors in 1772 on Easter Day. That's why it was called Easter Island. Now, all these civilizations, if you take the Mesopotamian civilization, it was between the twin rivers of Euphrates and Tigris. So it seemed like a good place to begin a post agriculture kind of civilization, where it was possible for you to irrigate the fields and prosper. There was a surplus of food, and surplus food always produced surplus populations, and then you begin to build infrastructure of priesthood and of kings and queens and the ordinary folk and the workers and the temple workers. What they didn't realize was that as they were progressing with this kind of agriculture, the land was getting saline, and eventually it collapsed. And the same kind of process appeared to be going on with the Mayan civilization. How it evolved, it blossomed, and it just collapsed because it couldn't sustain its population. The population that grew out of the prosperous period, it couldn't sustain it when agriculture became. It wasn't possible to carry out that same degree of agriculture forever. And it would appear that the Easter Islanders suffered the same fate. Now, in our current civilization, it was okay. In those days, if one part of the world failed, one corner of the world failed, the rest of the world carried on. The Mesopotamians failed, the Mayans failed, Easter Islanders failed, the Chinese carried on, the Indian civilizations carried on. But today, it's not the case. You have to think we are global. We are a global entity. And as Mr. COVID-19 would very eloquently remind us, that a global pandemic is a global pandemic, and that does not stop anybody from any nation anywhere in the world from catching it if they don't follow the rules. So if a global collapse comes, believe me, it's going to be a global collapse. And interestingly, in January, I received an email, a communication from the United Nations Development Agency warning us that there could be a repeat of the 2008, 2007, 2008 the financial collapse if we don't mend our ways. And we need to begin to draw back or begin to find answers before this global banking collapse came our way again. But lo and behold, what happens is Allah sends us COVID-19. So we are already learning the lessons of the projected lessons of what could have happened. Now we are right now in the situation that we possibly could have been in about 5 years' time. So we need to anticipate what is going to happen. I only just heard a few minutes ago on the news that inflation has gone down as well. Inflation is down. The wildlife is coming back to urban areas. People are breathing clean air and fresh air. So this whole thing is begin to make us think about what could really happen if there really was a global financial meltdown in the next 5 or 10 years. And we are also thinking about the aspect of climate change. People are saying we have to make sure that climate change does not go beyond 2 degrees centigrade, but all the scientific data points to the fact that by 2030, that we will have reached 2 degrees centigrade and gone beyond that. So these are all kind of things that we need to look at and absorb and try to find out what we needs to be done in order to kind of protect, if not ourselves, because we won't be here, I won't be here, I'm sure I won't be here, our children and grandchildren, the kind of world that we're going to leave them. So here's a cautionary tale that might clear some of the cobwebs surrounding these ideas. My organization, IFES, has developed an environmental teaching tool based on the Quran called Quran Creation and Conservation, which we deliver in various parts of the world. As a response to the tsunami that hit Aceh and the Sumatran coast in December in 2004, we were there delivering this workshop to develop a wider sense of environmental responsibility amongst the local people. The particular event that comes to mind is a conversation I had with a young local man during the course of a field trip that took us to Batangalis National Park, which was located in the Mandailing region of South Sumatra. We had a sub-agenda, and that was to look for the durian fruit. I don't know if people are familiar with durian. I think if people who lived in Malaysia might know what durian is, that grew in the forest. Ours was the largest group, which included a professor from the University of North Sumatra, located in Medan, on the east coast of Sumatra. To the uninitiated, this fruit could grow to the size of a football, have a thick, prickly outer skin, and an aroma which can in polite terms only be described as excruciatingly pungent, that can travel some distance. I have to remind listeners here that the environmental broadcaster, what was his name? The BBC man who comes on environmental programs, described eating durian like having peaches in a sewer. There we are. We sniffed our way to a small hamlet deep in the forest and managed to acquire a few durian fruits. But how to cut this fruit open and share it? It requires some skill and special knives. As we were pondering over this, a young man came to our rescue. He offered the veranda of his hut for shelter and also supplied the tools which were to cut open the fruit. With the salams and greetings over, the conversation drifted to the usual small talk, and I asked our host, let's call him Ali, who seemed reasonably well informed. I asked him what he was doing. The following conversation then ensued. Ali spoke in Indonesian, which was translated for me by the professor from Medan. So I asked Ali what he was doing. He says, I'm going to the university in Medan. This surprised all of us. A young man in the middle of a rainforest in the depths of Sumatra going to university. So I said, what are you studying? He said, forestry. Oh, more surprises. Oh, a bit of a laugh. Forestry? I said, but you grew up in this forest and you know all about it. So Ali said, I went to the local school in Panjabugan. I need to know more about the forest. Me, but your father protected the forest, and he had no university degree, and so did his father, and so on. Couldn't you learn from the old ways and the old wisdom? Ali, I can, but I need to have more scientific knowledge, and there is also illegal logging. Me, but you can't stop logging, illegal logging with science and a university degree. Illegal logging is about greed and irresponsibility. Will the university teach you how to deal with this? Ali, no, but as a graduate, I will have more authority and I will encourage the development of this area. If people are better off, they will not need to work for the illegal loggers. Me, but your father and the village elders had authority and there was no illegal logging in their time. But won't development make more demands on the forest? Ali, yes, but past generations were poor. I want a better standard of life for me and my family. When I have a degree, I can contribute to the development of my country. Me, that's not a bad thing. But if you live in Medan, where all the jobs are, you will live far from the forest which you want to save. And to visit this area, it will mean a 40-mile flight plus a 3-hour journey by road, or alternatively, a 12-hour journey by road, which will mean that you will be contributing to climate change with a very heavy carbon footprint. Ali, I will work locally and live in the village, which is the local township. That's Panjabugan. Me, but Panjabugan may have already reached the extent of its development because it is encroaching on the forest already. It is crowded. And the people there are contributing to the degradation of the forest. So where will you live? Ali, I'll get my own house built. Me, but the wood for this will come from the forest your fathers managed to save, and it may come from illegal logging. At this point, Ali's reply to this was inaudible. We parted after promises to meet again and continue this conversation on another occasion. That was about 15 years ago, so we haven't spoken since then. The point about this is that we are in a feedback loop. Empathizing with Ali's thought processes will, in a sense, point us in a direction that could conceivably cause us all some discomfort, because his route to prosperity is now the universally accepted one. We are all Ali's. What he wants is what we all want, and the good or bad news is what we make up as we pursue life's struggles. The issues are systemic, and we are in a feedback loop. Education, careers, consumerism, taxing the environment, more education, more consumerism, resulting in an aggregation of environmental collapse. How to escape this is something I will examine in the final chapter of this book. But for now, When civilizational collapse occurs in the past, it was local or regional. But today, we are living in a civilizational entity which is described as global. The rapid global spread of COVID-19 virus gives us a clue or two about what is to expect. When the inevitable global collapse occurs, whether it is due to a pandemic or climate change or bank-derived financial meltdown, it will be global in its expression, taking everything down with it. We do not have the right. We do not have the right to say that this civilization will continue forever and forever. And if you look at just a second law of thermodynamics in chemistry, in physics, there is this idea of entropy. Everything ends. And we all know that although this civilization has contributed to the destruction of other civilizations, this civilization is going to destroy itself in the way that it is functioning today. So this is why I conclude that third chapter of my book with a very simple equation. P plus D equals P plus D. Progress plus development equals pollution plus destruction. Now let's move on to chapter 4. How history accelerated. There was one inevitable element of change that ran like a thread through all cultures from the earliest times to this day, and that was the uniquely human habit of exchanging goods and services with each other. It began with the simplest of one-to-one transactions, and the emergence of money as an element of intermediation at a certain period in history accelerated this process. Before that, you see, there was just barter. There was no money. We can all imagine a time in the earliest times of human civilization where there was no such thing as money. People exchanged things, maybe a stone axe for a bit of meat or whatever, anything. But somehow, in early historic times, there was this thing called money that emerged. It may not look like it now, but the appearance of money way back in the midst of time was in itself a revolution. It was at the root of all the great civilizational advances we have made since then. But as is the habit of revolutions, it also had a disturbing effect on all of us. Now, the first evidence of money in recorded history emerged from the clay tablets of the Mesopotamian Sumerian civilization. That was the first recorded evidence that money was being used. That was about the 6th millennium before the Common Era. For that kind of sophistication to be expressed in clay tablets probably meant that the money did exist before then for some time. So we've all been using money for a long time, for millennia. So as money evolved over millennia, it also became part of the human genome, mutating into a technique that roused the human instinct for covetousness. Possessing objects of value that money could buy increased a sense of self-worth. This fertilized the dark side of Homo sapiens, and it sprouted in the shape of greed and lust for power. It fed the acquisitive instinct, now coming to be known as consumerism. It also needs to be said that the Quran is not anti-material. The Quran encourages the good things in life. As the Quran says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tuharrimu tayyibatin ma halallahu lakum wa la ta'udduna, inna Allah la yuhibbul mu'tadin. So Allah says in Quran, you who have Iman, Do not make haram the good things that Allah has made halal for you, but do not overstep the limits. Allah does not love people who overstep the limits. So Allah says, enjoy the good things in life. This is, I have created this for you. It's, so is it anything but anti-materialistic? You can have the good things of life that Allah has created. But Allah says, I have limits and don't exceed the limits. Inna Allah la yuhibbul muhtadin. Allah encourages trade, but with conditions. Indeed, the Prophet ﷺ was himself a trader. So let's look at this ayat which prohibits riba. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alladhina yaquluna riba la yaqumuna illa kama yataqum alladhi yatakhabbathu ash-shaytanu min al-masi. ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. Those who practice riba will not rise from the grave except as someone driven mad by Satan's touch. That is because they say trade is the same as riba. But Allah has permitted trade and He has forbidden riba. Now this must have been something that was of some intense discussion for this ayat to be revealed to the Rasul, because the Prophet himself was himself a trader. It meant what trade meant, and what I would contemplate is that people at that time, during the time of Rasul, is it legitimate to make an increase on the price you paid for a particular artifact when you're transferring to somebody else? The price increases. So is that halal or haram? There must have been an intense conversation. The nature of money and trade at the time of the Prophet ﷺ has become an issue. What economists today would define today as the velocity of money, that is one unit of currency changing hands several times over and grossing in value several times its own value, could possibly have been a cause for concern. So if a gold coin or a pound note changes hands several times, let's say gold coin, let's take a pound note, it's simpler to explain. A 10-pound note exchanges hands several times over a transaction. So that very same 10-pound note can buy 100 pounds worth of stuff. So this was a kind of a legitimate concern. But Allah says, trade is permitted, alhamdulillah. So we can trade. And that is how societies function today, but with another set of rules altogether. So also the idea of profit must have been giving a cause for concern. So this verse in the Quran drew a line under these issues. Riba was prohibited, but trade was permitted, alongside the notion of a just profit.
It wasn't 5 minutes, so we can wrap up for questions.
But riba-based money is all we use today, and that is why I say we are all in the lizard's hole without exception. What hit the accelerator in our time was the creation of the Bank of England in 1694. Before this period, the so-called European voyages' discovery were financed by a form of proto-capitalism. The Parliamentary Act of 1694, created to raise money to wage war against France, institutionalized capitalism, and the rest, as they say, is history. Adam Smith, the father of economics, went to great lengths to define money, as he understood it in the 18th century, as a commodity. Now, economists are coming round to thinking that the money we use today is merely an information exchange system. The Chinese are ahead of this game. They have just launched an experiment in digital currency. Following this logic, money could legitimately be called energy, or perhaps it is a conduit for transforming this energy into our modern lifestyles that is having such a devastating effect on the environment, or consumerism. It has also been described as a cancer, which usually has the habit of growing until it kills its hosts. I see money as a virus bred by the banks in their hothouses, which, if allowed to multiply, it will gnaw its way through the fabric of the natural world until there is nothing left. The money we use today is at the root of our environmental crisis. Alhamdulillah. Over to you, Adnan.
Thank you very much, Sidi Fazlan. That's a fantastic way to end things, comparing banking to the virus, which is exactly what it is. So we'll open up for questions. I think people can unmute themselves because there's only a handful of us. So I'm quite happy for people just to ask questions directly.
It doesn't have to be a question. It's a viewpoint, you know. It needs always have to be a question. You're free to talk.
Okay, so I'm quite happy for people to unmute themselves, and we can ask Sidi Fazlan directly. Any questions? Everybody's very quiet. I think the fast is getting to them.
Assalamu alaikum. I've obviously I spoke earlier before everyone came late. So just I've sent to you, Sidi Fazlan, the link to Planet of the Humans.
Humans, yes.
Yeah. So do watch it, and anyone else watch it, because it does raise some interesting questions, and it's on YouTube. Can you write text on this?
You can, if you look on, there's a little speech bubble in the middle of a screen for conversation, and there's a meeting chat on the right hand side, and you can add in free text.
Oh yeah.
I was messaging earlier on. People haven't seen it. I did say put your questions here, ask directly.
Yeah.
That's fine. Rizwan's also posted something on the 7th of May. Waste not, want not, making small changes this Ramadan. Julian Kirby, Friends of the Earth. There's a link there. Probably doesn't work, but you can copy and paste it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Sidi Fazlan, Assalamu alaikum. Question. So you've talked about the root of the problem, and maybe you want to say a bit about the solutions.
Yes, there are solutions. I mean, in fact, this thing that Adnan raised last time, off the grid, is sort of been going around my head. But off the grid is another way of saying circular economy. You know, and for us to grow our own food, to do our own businesses and do our own transactions within a kind of circular economy, and recycling and having a kind of a local sort of community with local governance. You know, it is possible. It is possible, but I don't think. At least we have to begin to try. And a good example of this are the Christian community in Pennsylvania. Who are they? The all Christian community.
Mormons.
The Mormons, exactly. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, they persisted. I mean, they persisted, and they are an autonomous community, although they're not completely off the grid. But they are a good example to learn from, actually. And we have to start somewhere. So I think one way of getting around this is, in fact, looking seriously at the possibilities of circular economies. But I don't think until the system collapses that we will be completely free. But at least we'll be autonomous, but keeping our links with others and working with other communities who are beginning to work off the grid and look at circular economies. It is possible. And it all means, you know, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, regenerating our economies, growing our own food, and you know, building our own homes and living off the land. And it is possible. There are people already doing it. And that's a straightforward answer to my question.
And just on that, also, there was living off the grid. There's a very good guide which I managed to get off the internet, and one of the very first things it talks about is to reduce your debt and become debt free, and work towards a plan on how far you want to go with living off the grid, because living off the grid has its own meanings.
Yeah, but also bearing in mind, we are talking of this at a time when the whole thrust of the globalized entity is going the other way. Is pulling the other way in the sense that they are now seriously, we already have digital currencies, as the plastic cards in our wallets would bear testimony. We are in a digital currency world. We are already in Orwellian territory. If you take into account the kind of the surveillance cameras all over the cities, all over the world, not just in Western Europe, but everywhere. And so we got to be careful of the plastics in our. This is the way that this is how the Norwegians and the Danes have managed to be the happiest countries in the world by falling into debt. How can you be happy? It doesn't make sense at all. You see, so in a sense, the money lenders are not in a hurry for you to pay back their loans. This is the fact, because they're happy to take the interest off you, and that's what keeps them going. You see, and so the answer to your question, Ridwan, is circular economy. Work your way through a financial free system, living off the land, collaborating with other people with the same mindset. I think you probably heard of the Transition Town movement. And then your friend Andrew Sims, Adnan, was part of this movement, wasn't he? If he's still.
Yeah, he used to be the one of the co-founders of the New Economic Foundation.
Yeah.
The author of the book Tuscopoli, Andrew Sims. I'm not sure where he is now, what he's doing.
Yeah.
Another thing was like Schumacher. Small is beautiful. I don't know where.
Eric Schumacher. Yeah.
I think he was well ahead of his time. I mean,
he was ahead of his time. Yeah, small is beautiful.
You said what?
That's yeah. Small is beautiful.
Marcus, are you there? I think you have a question. I'm picking on a friend of mine.
Okay.
He's too shy. Okay. No problem. Next question, anybody? Or contributions?
This subject, I actually spend a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about the way forward. And there is part of me that thinks that, well, the welfare state actually is a big problem and is one of the biggest barriers to anything happening, because whenever the government is paying people to not work, then there's no incentive for anyone to look at breaking free of the system. What we've become is like a luxury communist state where everyone's just got enough to not be angry and to kind of go with the status quo. And I think that's a big problem. And what it means is that the government is just going to keep paying people enough to stop them, because what we need like what you're saying about the economy. We need a marketplace. Like we need the profits and the companions. They were traders. People now buy their things from the supermarket, and then all that money, as we know from Tuscopoli, if you've read the book, all that money gets sucked out of the economy. How much of the green issue is because of supermarkets, because of the amount of plastic that supermarkets create. It all fits together, but to look at just the solution, you have to move away from the supermarkets. Therefore, you have to then bring back the open market, but you're not going to bring back the open market until people get off the welfare system. But they're not going to do that, because whenever you're getting free money, there's no point. People don't have that incentive. So the welfare state is going to stay. How I see it playing out is that it will just lead to hyperinflation, because they're going to just create more and more currency until eventually it's going to be so worthless that will be the scenario. And also like this, this thing where everything collapses. I mean, who would have thought it would be a virus that would trigger everything?
Mhm.
But unfortunately, we never seem to learn our lesson, and then we repeat the same thing. We're gonna go through another cycle now. Everyone's gonna think everything's okay, and we're gonna and then something will happen, and then. But I just wonder, the next time it happens, like the next time there's a collapse, is that gonna be the big one? Because this doesn't feel like the big one. Well, it isn't.
Well, I don't think that. To be honest, I think it's the calm before the storm. To be honest,
Yeah.
because I mean, if you think about the furlough scheme at the moment, the furlough scheme, the government has allowed people in businesses to allow their staff for 3 months, which is ending the end of June. Now, already businesses have already put the question back to the government and said, now what's going to happen beyond June, because this is not going to sustain us. We need to go beyond June. Now, the fact of the matter is that when these people come out of the furlough scheme eventually, this is going to cause masses and masses of waves of unemployment. The figure of unemployment about 2 weeks ago was already hit beyond 5.1 million unemployed, and it's growing astronomically.
UK.
The UK, in the UK, that's right. The US and many states are already protesting. There's already been lots of riots and protests.
Yeah.
A lot of this is not in the media. You'll not hear about it. Everything's just a distraction because everything is stay at home, save lives. That's what it's all about.
The Americans have gone up in my estimation. Actually, they seem to be one of the few people who are actually fighting back. Who actually like, hey, hang on, this is an attack on our freedoms. Like no one else is saying that. Everyone else is just like, oh yeah, okay, we'll stay at home. I always thought the Americans were dumb. Like, I mean, everyone else thinks that the Americans are, but actually, maybe they're not so dumb because they actually had the courage to go out and say this is not right.
Well, there's that documentary of 15 years ago, America: Freedom to Fascism. I strongly recommend people to watch that by Aaron Russo. That was very well researched, way ahead of its time. Aaron Russo, Russo. And it's available to watch on YouTube for free. It's a 2-hour-long documentary, and he talked about almost everything that we're involved in today, minus the virus. Like the banking system, RFID chips, surveillance control, everything he talked about, and it's well laid out. But just before we finish, has anybody else got comments or questions?
So what Abdullah is saying is basically trying to revive the local markets, isn't the farmers and the livestock market, so you bring,
Well, the thing is, it encompasses everything. I mean, it's all the distribution channels. Everything has to change. I mean, it sounds drastic and radical because it is, because everything at the moment is completely upside down. I mean, like just that thing of just the supermarkets, just that alone, like to change that. I mean, a supermarket would be an ideal market, an open market, because it's got all the infrastructure that you need: the car parks, the shelter, the refrigeration space, etc. So it would be perfect. But you would have to change, like, for example, the farmers who are growing the stuff that ends up in the supermarket. You have to change that distribution channel, because at the moment they're supplying a regional depot, and that supermarket then delivers it to the how you have to change how we do things.
Well, I think it's about people power, and people have to vote with their feet. They have to be able to understand, first of all, the issues, and they have to be able to make that choice. At the moment, their choice is going to the supermarket, and they have to move off of that and wean off that, and go to the other markets and buy alternatives. That's definitely. So there's one thing is off the grid, but I think what's important at the moment is unplugging from the grid. So you can unplug yourself in various ways: unplugging from the education system, unplugging from the medical system, unplugging from the welfare system, unplugging from the supermarkets, and all that comes as a package.
Yes, you can. Yeah, I think it's for people to begin to tackle these ideas, and begin to do something about it. And people will come with different solutions in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and we can learn from each other. You know, like I said, we can learn from the Amish. You know, they're a great community, and they've persisted for 200-300 years, and it won't be the same, of course. We, you know, this is a different country, different kind of people, and different resources, and different kind of land base. We can try it. It's possible. It's possible to be self-sufficient. But one thing is coming, though. One thing, as predicted, you know, is that there is going to be a collapse. If not by COVID-19, it will be by climate change. It will be by environmental change, and for people, it's already there. For the Solomon Islanders, people in the Maldives Islands, you know, the sea is coming over. They'll have no place to live in about 30-40 years' time. All those islands will be underwater. For them, it's arrived. For them, it's arrived.
I think just last before we just wrap up, Marcus, this is your last chance if you can hear us. Like Marcus,
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to come in and sort of say, yeah, that probably a note of optimism, although there is a sense of gloom, isn't there? That
yeah, why not? Of course.
It's been fantastic listening to you. Thank you very much for sharing this, and Adnan for inviting me again to this meeting.
You're welcome.
I did my MBA 10 years ago at Bradford, and one of the topics there was, I forget the name of the book, but we talked about some of the people that you've mentioned in the talk, and certainly this abuse of world's resources was resonating even then, back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
The sobering part for me is this move towards city living, and the idea of living off grid points to a huge number of people really struggling. When is it 70 to 80% of the world's population is now in a city environment.
Yeah.
So to live off grid, you're looking at a huge loss to the world's population to get back to a sort of an agricultural setting.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, my optimism comes from the transformation of the last several weeks. The sort of disassociation from some of the things is interesting, but whether or not our technology can carry us forward. I have friends who are lecturers at the various universities here in Leeds who changed within days their education system to being online.
Oh yes.
You've got clinical colleagues who have changed within days from 80% of their consultations being face-to-face to sort of 95% of them being by phone or video conference. Some of the facilities that, the fact that I'm talking to you in a field,
Right.
I'm sort of, is absolutely incredible, and to be able to have a team meeting whilst you're in different parts of the world. So
Yeah.
if we can moderate our consuming, is there hope for us?
Yeah.
I think your points around consumption are fantastic. So there's an incredible intellectual change about how we value things, and what you represent in your faith in the religion is something that really appeals to me. About several thousand years ago, so much of it was around people meeting together and talking over the issues.
Yes.
And in some respects, we watch Gogglebox or the news rather than talking together. So the empowerment comes from meetings like this, I think.
Yeah.
But it's how do we get better at it?
Yes.
And,
Sure.
I think the experiment that Adnan and yourselves are leading here, or the move, is really encouraging, daunting at the same time, in the world that we live in. But we have to be brave and hope.
Sure. How to manage?
Those are my reflections. I don't know if that's any questions, but
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so we can wrap up now and finish up. I think we've kind of gone past the 7 o'clock point, and I don't see any other questions, or you know, we can wrap up. Fatiha?
Yeah. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Speak
you.
next week.
Salam
Same time. Bye bye.
Okay,
Bye.
inshallah.
Thanks. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum. Fi aman.
alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.